Hello everyone, and thank you firstly to the organisers for the invitation to speak. I'd like to present this afternoon on behalf of the organisation I represent, which is the Lush Prize, on rewarding innovation and education in animal-free science. So this is a list of the topics I'll briefly cover. Firstly, an introduction and what is the Lush Prize itself, why we focus on what's termed the 1R, which I'm sure many of you will know is replacement of animal tests, some challenges and testimonies and why the Lush Prize was created, the story so far, some positive change that we've observed, going forward what the Lush Prize looks for, and some important final points and conclusions and take-home messages. So to start, what is the Lush Prize? It's a global prize to fund projects which are focused on human relevant or other scientifically relevant methods to achieve the paradigm shift that's needed towards what's considered better science and away from the unreliability of animal models. The Lush Prize was set up in 2012, so it's been running for 11 years now, and it rewards achievements in 5 categories, which are science, training, lobbying, public awareness and young researchers. Now I've shown the young researcher category in a slightly different colour there, and that's because it has a slightly different purpose to the other 4 categories, which are awarded retrospectively for recent achievements over the past 2 years in science, campaigning, training and education. The first 4 categories there also provide organisations or individuals, as it's open to both, with additional funds to continue their work. Whereas the young researcher category is slightly different, as it awards future research. So young researchers put a proposal together to nominate the work that they want to carry out. Young researchers have to be 35 years old at the time of nomination or younger, and they have to show an interest in a career in non-animal methods. All of the prizes have a main theme in common, and as I've already mentioned, it's to focus on the 1R, which is replacing or ending animal use in safety testing and biomedical research, training or education. So the nomination of work in those categories can focus on any of those themes. So some brief background on 1R, as I've already mentioned. Why 1R and why replacement? So I'm sure many people will know who are listening, but it may be new to some, that there is the concept of the 3 R's: reduction, refinement, replacement. This was first proposed in 1959, entitled The Principles of Humane Experimental Technique, by 2 UK scientists called Russell and Birch. You can see here. So they proposed the 3 R's concept. Ultimately, Russell and Birch aspired to replacement because reduction and refinement were put forward as measures on the road to replacement. Because reduction and refinement, either, as they suggest, reduction in animal numbers or refinement of the tests that the animals are used in, these are both still animal tests. They both routinely involve animals. So replacement is the ultimate aim because it looks to phase out and replace the use of animals, as the name suggests. So it was a groundbreaking concept at the time, but over 6 decades later, we still need further change, which is why the Lush Prize focuses on replacement specifically. So this next slide continues the theme of questioning why do we look at, why are we so interested in focusing on replacement specifically? And this diagram shows the cycle, the routine cycle of animal research, and of course supply and breeding of animals, which is in itself a huge industry now, and millions of animals are genetically modified and bred around the world in labs every year to supply research. And some of the phrases that you can see in red there are statements, just example statements and testimonies taken from applications to carry out procedures on animals within project licenses. And as you can see there, the the limitations of animal models are well known, but they're still used because they are familiar and they are termed well established, which means basically that many tests have been, or types of procedure have been carried out over and over again. So this is where this well established and the perception that animal use is the gold standard. So again, as you can see in that statement at the bottom in red, even though our understanding in these areas is still so poor, so animal use continues, and yet we still see, if you pick up many science papers, you'll still see lots of statements on how understanding of particular areas of research is still very poor, and yet we continue to use animals. So it's rather a catch-22 situation. And this has been termed lock-in in a paper some years ago, institutional lock-in of use of animal models where it is entrenched in the system. And it does mirror the funding of sources of grants as well. So you can see that there is a convention of use of animals is linked to supply and the breeding and future funding of animal research. So, recapping on, as we said earlier, 6 decades on from when the 3 R's were first proposed, this table conveys the situation that we have now with chemicals and pharmaceuticals. Generally, the current safety testing and biomedical research strategy can't really be considered fit for purpose. And this is after decades of reliance on animal models, which brings us back to why do we need replacement? This is not fit for purpose. The system isn't working. So if we look just very briefly there, I've just put 2 main example categories which do convey the safety testing and research situation generally. So chemical safety testing is the volume required worldwide is immense, and animal models simply can't keep pace. They are too inefficient and too much of a black box to keep pace with what's needed on high volume chemical assessment. As a result, there's a big unknown in the number of, not only the number of chemicals worldwide, also the level of data that is available on them and how reliable it is. So, for example, in the EU, it's considered at the moment that 70% of the chemicals that are used across the EU don't have sufficiently characterised data. And it's causing great concern, and as a result, thousands of substances still raise concerns over their level or their lack of safety data, despite large-scale testing regulations. And the regulations themselves undergo regular change. Many of them are undergoing change at the moment. And the problem there is that they are likely to increase levels of animal testing because they require, for example, new categories of chemicals to be added, which require assessment, and therefore many of them will need new animal tests according to the regulation. So we're in a situation where we're always trying to make things better and reduce animal testing, but in these situations with some of the chemical regulations, we're trying to stop things getting worse and trying to prevent increases in animal tests. So then switching to pharmaceuticals, I'm sure many people will know this statistic, this very concerning statistic that has been around for some years now. A very high failure rate exists in the field of pharmaceutical testing, where 86 to 90% of new drugs tested fail or are withdrawn somewhere in the clinical trial pipeline during testing on humans because they've been considered successful on the basis of preclinical tests before the human trials. And these preclinical tests are largely based on animal studies. So they're considered safe and effective, they proceed to human trials, yet effects in humans that just haven't been picked up in the animal tests mean that the drugs can't proceed in human testing and marketing. So as a result, many diseases still lack effective treatments and cures. Of around several thousand diseases, around 500 only have treatments available. So it's a very low success rate. As a result, there's this concern with pharmaceutical pipeline attrition, as I've mentioned, with this high failure rate. And the costs keep going up, but the product level doesn't match the level of cost that's being invested. So we also have the problem of how many potential new treatments are overlooked due to false positives in animals. So, as I've said, preclinical or non-clinical tests in animals are always performed before any new drug proceeds to human testing. So where they're tested in animals and the toxicity or other adverse effects are observed in the animals, the drugs will be rejected and won't proceed to human trials. But because of species differences, there are many potential drugs which could be safe and effective in humans. So it begs the question how many of these have been overlooked and patients have missed out. So this next slide is further evidence in the form of challenges and testimonies that we have observed on the Lush Prize since it was created. And many of these will be familiar to people. It's really just collating and using this evidence to proceed with the campaign and promote animal-free, human-relevant science. And when we see these types of testimonies, we know that there is a real concern and a real need for better science. So the challenges, as I've mentioned earlier on the cycle diagram you saw, there is a large element of convention and comfort zone in using animals and continuing to use animals. That's why I've added the phrase there. We've always done it like this, and I've heard colleagues say that in the past. It's well known and a common attitude. So convention often takes the place of innovation and better science and finding a better model. The next row down there is a major obstacle, and it's that requests to validate new non-animal methods are often asked for in animals, as absurd as that sounds. So many scientists will propose new methods that they've developed, new human-based methods. They work in their own right. They're providing human-based data. They're robust. Yet when they submit them for review and publishing, they're told go away and do it in mice, for example. And this is a major obstacle again because of this system where peer review is often performed by those that use animals and prefer to use animals and have built their careers on using animals. So there is this inherent bias, unfortunately. So there is also a misperception that non-animal methods at best can only complement or reduce the use of animals but can't replace them. And non-animal methods are being used to a great extent at the moment to complement animal models. So they'll be used before animal tests to eliminate, for example, invalid chemicals or drugs that don't meet certain structure or function requirements, for example, when they're looking at early testing. So they are being used as complements, but our argument and our campaign keeps promoting the message that they can replace. They just need to be given the opportunity and the investment and further development. So there is also high concern of the overstatement of the benefits of animal models. So this is a common problem as well, where animal models have to be used and there's really no adequate evidence. It tends to be conjecture and testimony that animal models are best because it comes from a system where they are just used again and again. And as I've already said, bias towards animal models within the peer review and publication process is a big problem. We've heard of scientists frequently who of all ages, not just young researchers, not just new researchers, but more senior and more experienced researchers. They try to promote non-animal models and they're told, go away, and if you want to get published, do it in animals, which is a common message. So there is the prejudice, and therefore this leads to a lack of funding for scientists who want to promote animal-free methods. And these testimonies down the right-hand side, you can see here, I just copied some of these in and feel free to read them later. These are types of feedback that we hear on how difficult it has been. It is getting better. I should say that it, of course, is getting better now with the realization that we need non-animal models, and they are providing much better data. But there is still a huge challenge to overcome. And so this is a very simple visual slide, really, to say it's time for real change and a real gold standard. it is unsustainable to keep considering animal use as a gold standard. It simply doesn't deliver for what's needed for a modern scientific research strategy. So we call for better science and better safety. I'll just briefly cover this slide. These tables convey some of the successful winners and some statistics on the Lush Prize. Last year the Lush Prize was 10, so we did this analysis to show the scope over the last 10 years. So you can see there the number of winners in the green table. Obviously, as we give for every award, we give 5 young researcher awards in each Lush Prize cycle. That's why the numbers are higher there, because they are smaller award bursaries. We also have an award called the Black Box, which isn't awarded each prize cycle, but it's only really reserved for what's called breakthrough moments. And a Black Box was awarded in 2015 to several organisations for their work on mapping the methods that are needed for in vitro skin sensitisation for what's called the adverse outcome pathway. And I'll explain that again briefly later for those that may be new to AOPs. We also have Lifetime Achievement and Political Achievement Awards, which are non-monetary prizes. And we've been very pleased to see that in the blue box, you can see here the number of nominations since 2012 has more or less doubled for looking over the 10-year period. So in 2018, the Lush Prize became a 2-yearly award. We're very, very pleased to see the awareness and the number of nominations has grown. And so further positive change and the international outreach that we try to promote on the Lush Prize. So we have an ever-increasing demand for funding of young researchers, and it's one of the main reasons why the prize was set up, to allow young scientists who often face real challenges in getting heard and trying to get their research set up. So we're really pleased to have seen an ever-increasing demand and recognition for young researchers. We've had exciting initiatives and outreach globally. So we set up, within a couple of years of the Lush Prize being set up, we extended the Young Researcher Fund a couple of times to reach Asia and also South America. The picture you can see there is from some of our winners a few years ago across China, Korea and Japan. And we were so pleased to be able to fund their groundbreaking work across Asia, because they were really making strides to promote non-animal methods among young scientists. The lady you can see here on the left of the picture is a young female scientist from Japan, and she came across real problems within her own research team who were telling her, you must use animals, you mustn't use non-animal methods. She persisted, she got Lush Prize funding, and she has since gone on to set up further human tissue models. So she has done amazingly well, as all of the winners have. So just to briefly go through some of the other outreach and investigations we're looking at the Lush Prize. This year we have completed some foundation research looking at driving outreach across Africa. So getting awareness of the level of animal research that's carried out across Africa and the level of recognition of alternatives. So we are still working on that and still building on that investigation. We have greater recognition and acceptance of Lush Prize winners generally, and as I've said, breaking new international ground and funding animal-free research in areas where gaining support is still very difficult and often refused. So we see a real need for the Lush Prize to keep filling that gap and promote and apply a bit of funding where we can. So this is just another further, to keep the positive messages going, this is further testimonies on Lush Prize, from Lush Prize winners in campaigns across all categories: science, research, campaigning, training, and how they've had real positive impact from being able to get the funding, get their projects set up, and then often they'll apply in future for more funding for second stage and third stages of projects, which is great to see. And there's no better evidence of how funding and scope to be able to do the work. There's no better evidence of that than from these testimonies. So we've included some here. So going forward, this slide really covers two two aspects. So one is some of the observations we've made over the first 10 years of the Lush Prize, since launch in 2012. So we've linked this to particular categories, but of course some of these findings run across all categories. So when we look at science, which also includes young researchers and training, because that is they are the main science categories. Of course, the training is often in non-animal models directly, so it's impacted by the science. So there's an increasing recognition of the failure of the animal model in general, and with that, coupled with that, strong advances in non-animal methods. In the last 10 years, and especially the last 5 years, we've seen an exponential increase in awareness and the need for advances, and which are ongoing in vitro models, for example. So multi-organ chips are just one example, and in silico models. So they have ranged from 10 years ago, they were the simpler, very simple analysis. There's now really sophisticated machine learning, deep learning models that involve AI, artificial intelligence, and so on. And also we've seen a real rise in the concept of adverse outcome pathways, and these are really being embedded as a core knowledge framework. So for those that are new to adverse outcome pathways, to try and explain them in 1 or 2 sentences isn't very easy, but I shall try. So it's a concept, it's a mapping concept to map the molecular and cellular events that are seen in response to a chemical or a stressor in the body, and how those molecular and cellular events then run through to become adverse events seen in a person and even in the population. So these types of frameworks are used to inform what types of methods are needed, non-animal methods, so coming back to in vitro and in silico methods, to inform these adverse outcome pathways. A much clearer explanation of that can be found on the Lush Prize website, and on adverse outcome pathway frameworks as well. So looking at politics and in particular lobbying and public awareness, which we award funding for. So we've seen a global positive impact of the animal tested cosmetics bans. So they were first proposed 10 years ago in the EU. These are bans on the sale and marketing of cosmetic ingredients tested on animals. Now, everyone will know, or many will know, I'm sure, there are major regulatory loopholes with the cosmetics bans, unfortunately, that are affected by other regulations. But despite that, they've still had a huge positive impact globally, not only in triggering the development of new non-animal methods, but also the EU bans, for example, then had a domino effect around the world. So we saw other bans happening, for example, India, Israel, and elsewhere. So there's been a real ripple effect. With that, number 5, there's a rising global aspiration for full replacement and many roadmap initiatives, and we'll be discussing that in a future event, and I will mention that at the end. And of course, a rise of 3R centres and replacement ideas. So with 3Rs, of course, I said earlier, 3Rs have been around for years. We consider that they have had their time, but we know that 3Rs are still necessary to promote the 1R. So a rise of 3Rs, centres and replacement ideas. So continuing with the observations, so of course we've seen many positive aspects, but we still have the overall very realistic view that despite all of this attention and focus on new non-animal methods, and it is rising all the time, and that is fantastic, but there is still a painfully slow decrease in animal use. In some areas we are even seeing animal tests increase, as I've mentioned, and we need to see those numbers go down. So despite all the great work that's being done on non-animal methods, we need to see it tangibly connect to animal numbers going down. And of course, number 8 there, leading into that institutional inertia, as I mentioned earlier about the lock-in and the cycle of routine animal research, this remains an ongoing challenge, and we keep focus on this. So ending this slide on a positive outlook, there is more discussion than ever of human relevant, or we should say biologically relevant science, as well as human relevant science, because that's also a relevant term. And we're seeing less on alternatives, because alternatives, although it's a useful term and we know generally what it means, alternatives doesn't really convey what we need. So we are careful and very specific to say non-animal methods and animal-free methods, because alternatives can often be used to still refer to certain animal tests sometimes. So we're clear, we say replacement and non-animal methods. And finally then, number 10, young scientists are increasingly seeing non-animal methods as their gold standard. So the advantage of young scientists coming into the field is that they don't necessarily have the outlook of perhaps more senior colleagues who have been using animals for years, that you have to use animals because it's the only way to go, because that's how many attitudes are formed when animals have been used for years and people are used to using them, as I've said. So young scientists don't necessarily have that view, that entrenched view. And these 4 criteria in the pink on the right there, these are what we look for generally on the Lush Prize. So impact, significance, quality and innovation. So I'm coming to the last couple of my slides now, just some important final points to recap. So we've spoken a lot about replacement. Replacement is our mission, and 1R, as we've said, we call it the 1R as opposed to the 3 Rs to really focus on replacement specifically. And it has its place, but it's also important to remember that we're not looking to replace what we consider to be flawed. So often, and you'll see this if you look at any documentation or legislation where non-animal methods are mentioned, the criteria is often that it has to be at least equal or better than the animal method. Well, we of course would say it has to be better, because it doesn't need to be, we don't want to aim for something that's considered equal to an animal method, which is flawed when it doesn't predict what we need it to. So there's an element here of improvement rather than replacement. Also, it's not one single method that will it's not a case of each non-animal method replacing an animal test. It's combinations of different methods. So, for example, talking about skin sensitization earlier, there are several methods there that represent each stage of a chemical being absorbed and the effects shown in the skin. And that replaces several assays for skin sensitization replace the animal tests, and they're far more targeted and far more predictive of human sensitivity. So it's not just one method, it's many methods that will replace animal use. Especially in where animal models aren't even available in some research areas. The animal models are so poor that these are areas where they are crying out for non-animal methods to be funded and developed. We also say, as I mentioned earlier, we talk about solutions rather than alternatives. This is simply better science. We're not looking for an alternative that replaces something flawed. That's not the answer. We're looking for better science and solutions. And finally, not all animal tests need replacing. Many can just stop. So, for example, there are many duplicative and redundant tests that are carried out every single day that with the right investment to examine and review these methods, they would stop because they'd be seen to be redundant and just simply not needed. So there are real quick wins to be made by looking at these types of tests as a priority. So what's equally needed is development of new non-animal approaches and also better use of existing approaches, because animals are still in use where non-animal methods are available, and that's important to remember. And finally, to harmonise and level up. So I should also say that these 3 sets of points relate to these points in the diagram here. So to harmonise and level up, so to mandate animal-free approaches as best practice and the real gold standard is where we should be heading. There are infinite new business opportunities as well. So this has of course, we talk about the science and we talk about the ethics and the suffering, but what's equally important here is how much this, how much this can innovate. And there are endless business opportunities for research groups and supply chains. And as I said, to get the house in order, so to speak, which is to eliminate redundant animal tests. And of course, as we've said, there are those which need replacing, but there are many that don't, and that would be an early priority task for eliminating the tests that can. There are tests that can stop tomorrow, This is a key message. We know that some of this isn't an overnight job, and it's committing to establishing the road for change. But there are many tests which could stop tomorrow if they were reviewed and analysed properly. So there are animals suffering, and some of these could be really quick wins and short-term goals to eliminate these redundant tests. And finally, so some positive take-home messages. So as I've spoken about, Lush Prize was established over the last decade, and we continue to evolve and look at how the prize can be made better in helping to fund and promote science and campaigns and lobbying for what we all aim for, which is a full transition to animal-free research, testing, education and training. The big picture is, the good news is there is a growing trickle of change, and we want to turn it into a wave, and we keep working on that. So encouraging progress is underway, but it is still a drop in the ocean compared to the ongoing global funding of animal research. So, as has been needed for some time and is still needed, whole-scale international government action is required, driven by political lobbying, and to prevent legislative changes from driving science backwards and actually increasing animal use. So there is still a real balance there to be had, and of course authorities need to champion scientific innovation by reallocating funding and resources. And it's important to make that point about reallocation. It's always talked about for increased funding and resources. There is funding and resource there. It needs reallocating and needs to be taken away from the wastefulness of animal methods and towards non-animal methods, to develop them, to enforce them and to harmonise them, to improve science and research opportunities and phase out and end animal use once and for all. So just briefly, a link to another event we have coming up next month, Tuesday the 14th of November. It's our regular conference. We have a conference each year. The prize actually happens every 2 years, but we have a conference this year. So how can roadmaps help bring forward an end to all animal use in chemical safety testing is this year's theme. It's a half day. It's entirely free to register and attend. You can attend for any parts of the sessions that you'd like to. So all details are there, and feel free to register on Eventbrite. So I have put the link there. If you look at Eventbrite and look up Lush Prize Conference, you'll find it straight away. And also finally, as I've mentioned, Lush Prize, the next actual prize awards is next year, and nominations are open now until Friday the 1st of December this year. So do visit the website, the Lush Prize website there to visit, and if you're thinking of nominating your work, or please share it to colleagues if you think they might like to nominate their work. And I'd like to finish and say thank you very much for listening, and happy to answer questions, or feel free to contact me at the email address there. Thank you very much.